Madam Chair, there has been a serious misunderstanding from opposition. Let me at least try to clarify what we think each side. Let me reiterate what our opening half has tried to say. What is conviction, Madam Chair? Conviction is when a sentence has already passed. That person, after investigation, has been proven guilty, and that person has served that amount of sentence, Madam Chair. That is the meaning of conviction, right? If a person is arrested, that person is only a suspect, Madam Chair. Hence lies the distinction between conviction, suspect and a convict, Madam Chair. So what is our problem in today's state? So when a person is already convicted, the person can appeal, right, in the appeal court or a higher court, Madam Chair. And after appeal, if that higher court believes that this person is innocent, then that person goes away. But after that, that person has already served a certain amount of time. So should or not the state compensate for that amount? We say yes. Why? Now, why should the state compensate? I'll give you a few arguments. No doubt there is a separation of powers among the state. There's the state, there's the executive, legislation, and judiciary. But we believe, Madam Chair, that although they are separate, Madam Chair, they are not entirely independent, Mr. Chair. Because judges get the salary from the executive, Madam Chair, right? And in previous cases, the government or the state has been sued. And who pays for it, Madam Chair? The state foots the bill, Madam Chair. So although they are separate powers essentially, but there is a certain amount of overlapping of powers. So this has to be made clear initially. So it's like if I own a company, my driver hits someone else and commences that fault. The driver is in the capacity as my employee, and I, as the employee, have to pay for my worker's fault, Madam Chair. It's very simple. It's just that simple, Madam Chair. But how do we compensate, Madam Chair? No, we need to compensate via money. Why money, Madam Chair? Because money is the easiest form of currency, Madam Chair. But on the surface, it seems very frivolous, Madam Chair. It's the easiest solution, and I'll tell you why it's also the best solution. Because essentially, we understand that we cannot reverse the amount of trauma that has been spent in jail, Madam Chair. Because we cannot also compensate the amount of psychological trauma, which has already been elaborated further. But the precedents, Madam Chair, if someone commits a crime, Madam Chair, that person is fined, Madam Chair, right? If there is an argument, if there is a case of tort, settlements are also carried in the amount of cash, Madam Chair. Now, this precedent in the legislation, sit down. This precedent in the legislative system shows that money is the easiest form of compensation. Yes, it is not perfect. Yes, it doesn't reverse, but that is the best what we have in status quo. And that precedent, Madam Chair, should also be carried forward into my first extension on the nature of the legislative, Madam Chair. The nature of legislative, yes, but before I go.
It shows how when we give the money towards this convict, it shows how the society is actually just profit-minded and not actually respecting what the government already done to serve the justice.
Madam Chair, justice, whether that person served, whether the judge works or not, the person, and what if justice was not served, right? What if the wrong person was not arrested? Should that person still feel guilty? So whether or not that the real person has been arrested or not, I think the fault here is between the judge, the legislation and party A, not party B, not party C, Madam Chair. So if you have a problem with party A, that problem or that compensation should be done within that transaction, Madam Chair. So on what? But before I go into the nature of legislation, let me talk on what grounds should the state represent. Because we argue that there is an amount of lost time, Madam Chair. You cannot replace the amount of time lost when that person spends in prison, Mr. Chair. There's also the lost amount of income, and even you lose your job, Mr. Chair. There's also this idea of defamation, Mr. Chair. And number three, you also suffer from trauma, Mr. Chair. Prison is not a beautiful place, believe me. Number four, right? There's also something called post-prison discrimination. Although you are cleared of your name, Madam Chair, people will still look you in the grey shade of eyes, Mr. Chair. And number five, trauma not only to yourself but also your family. She clearly says that, in US, it is so beautiful, the government will take care of your family. Bullshit! With permission, Madam Chair. because I feel for these people. Because children are sent to foster homes, Madam Chair. Families are broken, Madam Chair, right? Although as much as the government or the state tries to compensate, Madam Chair, the amount of problems cannot be reversed, and we feel that. And we feel that the financial money, the compensation is not a form of reversing that justice, Madam Chair, but rather a souvenir, or which has been practiced so far in the nature of legislation. But what is in the nature of legislation that allow me to explain, which is my extension, right? In the nature of legislation is such that it avoids mistakes, Madam Chair. There's a lot of lengthy bureaucracy. Things like the prima facie, Madam Chair, things like double jeopardy. We do not want to convict that person again. We want to make sure that there is a certain amount of proof before we can convict that person. But even if through all these full proof measures, mistakes still can happen, Madam Chair. So what do we do when mistakes has already been done, Madam Chair? The courts or any judiciary because there was no setting, in Commonwealth countries, United States, and any Western liberty takes the judiciary very, very seriously, Madam Chair. Because in any right-minded judiciary, when mistakes has been admitted, rightfully, Madam Chair, compensation has already been given, Madam Chair, and in also this democracy, counter-sues are also possible, Madam Chair. So to avoid counter-suing, because counter-suing is very common in these countries and Commonwealth countries, because if that person has been faulted, I can re-sue the company. So in order to avoid this hassle, this amount of bureaucracy, why can't this form of legislation be allowed for? Allow for a certain, for example, if I spend X days in prison, I should be paid that X amount of money for the amount of time spent in prison. Very easy calculation, solves all the bureaucracy, and it is always in line with the trend and the nature of legislation, Madam Chair. We believe, Madam Chair, that this is the right thing to do. It might not necessarily reverse the past mistakes, Mr. Chair, but we believe, Madam Chair, that this is the best situation, and this is always in line, but importantly, we're in line with the lines of any judiciary court system anywhere in the world, especially the Commonwealth. And we believe that even when someone is already hanged, Mr. Chair, we cannot reverse it, and we believe compensation is the best way. With this, we are proud to propose. Thank you.
That today, neither justice is served, nor the principles of the organization of our democracy is being upheld. Before moving on to my two extensions, how today essentially you are punishing a group of taxpayers which has nothing to do with the plight that you render them in, and secondly, how the separation of the state and the judiciary is severely distorted by today's policy and the practical consequences of that. Let us take a look at what government gave us. Closing government gave us one thing. They said that we should avoid hassle of companies suing individuals, counter-suing. We say that's civil. We say that opening up government has clearly said this is a criminal court, criminal case, criminal setting. We don't understand what place their extension have in today's case. Secondly, quickly dealing with their thing, how money is the easiest form of token. We say first of all, if it's really that tokenist, then it shouldn't have any practical consequence that OD is trying to rectify in the status quo. Secondly, they also say that judges are employees of the government. We say, first of all, that's completely ridiculous. Even though judges are being paid by the government, they shouldn't be accountable to the government. We say these are completely two different things. We say they're very wrong conception of how there's an overlapping between the judiciary and the executive occurs in, for example, totalitarian regimes, but definitely not in democracies that they talked about. Reopening government, several points. First of all, how it will harm the credibility of the state. We say, first of all, that if in the case that no compensation is enough, by branding it and putting a value on the amount of hurt and amount of injury done to these individuals, won't get you any more credibility, because people will always think that it's not enough, that this amount of money is never enough to compensate that. This is not enough, the state is being meager, all of that. All of that does not help you to uphold your own credibility. We also say that without any policy of compensation, this sort of dispute, this sort of credibility drain will essentially be avoided. Second thing, they have never characterized how an investigation, a criminal investigation is being conducted. We tell you that sometimes it's the lawyer's mistake. We tell you sometimes it's a police mistake. We tell you that it's not a mistake at the end of the day, that there's no mistake being done. That essentially the criminal investigation occurs by the police or the law enforcement agent assessing the likelihood of a suspect, and if that likelihood crosses a certain threshold, which is in the SANS score beyond reasonable doubt, then we convict it. We don't see how today there's a mistake that can be committed by the judiciary or by the police. They have never tried to respond to that point, so we don't know what we should apologize for. Moving on to my extension. First of all, we say that they've wrongly said that today the state is a continuous agent. Because what happens if you have a guy who was wrongfully convicted 10 years ago is that you have a change of government 5 years ago, you have a change of civil bureaucracy, you have a change of everything within that government. Essentially the whole government changed. The state doesn't stand for the society. The state is a discrete operation organ, and we don't think that holding today the state accountable, which it has nothing to do, it does have no contributions to the plight of that individual who was committed before the state is even in place in the current status quo, is fair, because you're not actually punishing the right people. You're not actually making that person contribute. We say, compensate. We say that these are the things that they've never tried to resolve. We say justice entails that you have to go directly to the person who created harm to you. We say that state is not a continuous agency, and the state, because of the change of guards, will not retain that liability. Something that they need to prove to us why that liability extends over time, which they never did in 3 substantive speeches. Secondly, we say that what's the problem when you don't separate the judiciary branch and the executive branch? How does today's policy not separate them? Because essentially, the state is apologizing for the mistake of the court, as they're saying. What happens now is that the court's decision is being held under scrutiny by the representative of the people. Since we're talking about democracy, then the executive branch is being selected by the people in a way. The state basically means that we will drag through the judiciary's decision through, first of all, that executive branch and the representative people. Secondly, through the media. We say that's very bad because it's not meant to be that the judiciary is. Are you going to add a point?
Yes. Firstly, we say that this society also the taxpayer, so this taxpayer burden is not set. Second, government have a function to control the judiciary. The failure of the judiciary is the failure of the government cannot control.
We say that it doesn't make sense when you say that the police can present a case to the court, but the court is fair, so the state has no say in what the court decides. If the state thinks that police case is all right, then if the court thinks that the police case is fine, then the court will be a launch decision. We don't think, in any case, of that sequence is the court under the control of the state. We don't think that this horrendous accusation from the distortion of democratic principles from the government is ever justified. Moving on, we say basically you hold in the court's decision through the scrutiny of the media and through the scrutiny of the public. You also say that the public and the government can declare that judicial decision to be wrong and apologize on behalf of it. That's very bad. Basically you say that the people can hold the court accountable. We think there's a reason why judges are not popularly elected. We think there's a reason why we want judges to be free from influences of the population. Exactly because we think that not all popular decisions is the right decision. They want the judiciary to make the right decision. What happens now is that you open the avenue and the precedent of the population and also the representative of the people in the form of the executive branch to influence judicial decisions, and you legitimize that avenue. We think that's very bad because it creates precedents of doing so, and it creates avenues for the public and the state to pressure these judges in other trials. One very, very practical consequence is that the state wants to maintain its wholesome image of the protector of the people, and therefore when this unpopular case in place, the state will pressure the judges, simply because there's no separation between the judiciary branch and the executive branch. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand for democracy, we stand for equality, and we stand for justice. At the end of the day, go for closing.